I wonder if there is more to God's command to Adam and Eve to be fruitful and multiply than what is explicitly stated in the Bible. Is it because Adam and Eve were going to die and he wanted humanity to continue on after them? I guess that's kind of what ended up happening, but I don't think that was the original plan. When you read in Genesis 2 about God creating the earth is described in a way that makes it seem like it is a wasteland. No plants yet, no rain, and no one to work the ground. But it does say God created a garden in the east called Eden. I guess in this context, east means east of where Moses lived, or whomever the book of Genesis was written by. But anyway, so you have this garden paradise that God created, but the rest of the earth being mostly barren wasteland other than some streams. Now Adam was placed in the garden by God, and there is where God created Eve from Adam. Genesis 2:15 says God put Adam, or as it says in this passage, the man, there to tend and take care of the garden. I think that's a critical passage because I think that might be what Adam's original purpose was, and in turn reflect on what Adam's offspring were probably supposed to do. So what happens next after God tells Adam to tend the garden is Eve sins and causes Adam to sin. And I think this disrupts what was intended to happen next. The sin causes Adam and Eve to die, not die physically immediately, but they eventually do physically die. If they hadn't sinned, maybe they would have never physically died. I think there is some debate on whether they would have physically lived forever, or still physically have died at some point and become spiritual beings, but it's not really an important debate for this topic I'm discussing here. What's important here, I think, is that God told man to multiply. This was back in Genesis 1 before the sin of eating the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil happened. So it seems it was always in God's plan for Adam and Eve to have offspring of their own. So what was the purpose of God giving mankind the ability to reproduce and create new life? Elsewhere, the Bible says that the angels in heaven do not reproduce. So the gift of creating life was something specifically given to humans and to the animals of earth under their dominion. So why did God choose to give humans the ability to create life? Something not even the angels could do? Well, maybe he just wanted to create another being who could create life. But even if that is so, I think there's more to it than that. Remember how God created the earth and it was mostly a wasteland except for the garden paradise that he planted in the east? And then God placed Adam in the garden to tend the garden? Well, I think God wanted mankind to turn the rest of earth into a paradise. So I think the garden was supposed to be Adam's domain, and Adam's children should have freely left the garden to plant seeds and turn the wasteland outside of the garden into a paradise too. Then their children would have moved further out and planted more seeds and turned more of the wasteland into paradise. And this would go on with successive generations until the whole earth was turned into a paradise like Eden. Now, of course, that's not what actually happened. Adam and Eve sinned and they got expelled from the garden. So now instead of expanding paradise, they have to learn to fend for themselves in the wasteland the best they can. Then Cain invents murder and kills his own brother Abel. I don't think that was ever supposed to happen either. In the perfect world, they would have both freely left the garden and worked together to create a paradise like the garden. I think that's always been the purpose, for man to tend the earth and make it a paradise. It just hasn't worked out as well as it should have. There are many who try to make it a better place, but there are others who are greedy and jealous and hold back progress. So instead of living in a perfect paradise, we live in an imperfect world that has good and bad in it. As for what would have happened in a perfect world once the descendants of Adam and Eve had finished turning the earth into a paradise, I'm not sure. I suppose they would keep tending their own plot of the paradise, but at some point here, I would expect someone to ask the question about what would happen once the earth was filled up. What about overpopulation? Well, I don't know. Perhaps God would have just said, okay, y'all are done, no need to have any more kids. And I suppose in a world where none had sinned, they would have just listened to his command and stopped having children. Or maybe the plan would have been to take the show on the road. Maybe God would have taken children born after the earth was full to other planets to turn them into paradises too. I don't really know. I'm not really trying to answer that question though. All I'm really thinking about here is what was God's original plan for Adam and Eve's children. And I think he wanted them to freely move beyond the garden and continue the work he had done in creating the garden, and for them to work together doing it. That isn't what happened because Adam and Eve sinned and got expelled from the garden, and had to learn to do the best they could instead. So what do you think? Were humans given the gift of creating a life so they could create more people to expand paradise? Or is there something else planned? Those are my thoughts on that. Thanks for listening.